Cold rain needles the party field, and the lanterns sputter as if they are breathing their last. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a horse screams, high and wrong, and the sound carries through the damp like a blade. Frodo tastes smoke, though no fire is near. Gandalf's hand closes around his shoulder with sudden force, and in the wizard's eyes there is a dread that has not yet found a name. A black shape moves along the far ridge, and the grass lies flat behind it. If you want more Middle-earth turned sideways like this, leave a like and subscribe for the next divergence. And tell the story where you are watching from, city or country, late night or morning. Your comments help shape which road we take next. Gandalf did not wait 17 years. He stood behind Frodo at Bag End while the last of Bilbo's laughter still echoed in the tunnels, while the silver spoons were being counted and the confetti swept into piles. And he watched Frodo turn the little golden ring over on his palm, and the wizard heard something that was not a sound at all, a pressure behind the world, as if a great eye somewhere had opened in a dark room. He had intended to leave. He had told himself he needed counsel, records, proof. He had told himself there was time. Then Frodo slipped the ring onto his finger, just for a moment, the way a hobbit might try on a waistcoat that had belonged to a beloved elder. Frodo vanished. The room did not go empty. It went wrong. Shadows clung to the corners, and the air thickened as though it remembered an older language. "Take it off," Gandalf said, and his voice was not gentle. Frodo's hand fumbled, and when he reappeared, he was pale, breathing quickly, as if he had been underwater. The ring lay on the table between them, like a drop of sunlight that refused to warm anything. Gandalf stared at it, and the memory of Isildur's pride, of old tales told in council chambers, rose in him like bitter water. He had not yet proven anything. He had not yet chased the thread back through years and scrolls. But he had felt the wrongness, and the wrongness was enough. "What is it?" Frodo asked, trying for a smile and failing. "Is it dangerous?" There was a question in Frodo's voice that he did not know he was asking. "Is the world still safe if this is mine?" Gandalf's gaze went to the round window, to the hill beyond, to the Shire that had never been a battlefield and could not imagine becoming one. The wizard's thoughts leapt far away over mountains and marshes to a land of ash where a tower was rising again. The ring did not need 17 years to be dangerous. It had been dangerous the moment it was forged. "We are leaving," Gandalf said. Frodo blinked. "Leaving for where?" "Rivendell," Gandalf answered, and the word tasted like a door slammed in a storm. "Now." Frodo's mouth opened, then closed. "But my life is here." Gandalf's hand softened on Frodo's shoulder. "And that is why we must go before it learns your name." He did not explain how names traveled. He did not speak of spies and whispering creatures. He did not yet know the path by which the enemy would find the Shire. He only knew that a thing of power had been lying like a seed in soft earth, and if it sprouted here, everything green would burn. Samwise Gamgee was outside, hands black with soil, their ears sharper than any sensible person would credit. He heard the word Rivendell and nearly dropped his trowel. He pressed closer to the open window, heart thumping, and he heard Gandalf's low voice. "You will tell no one," Gandalf said, "not even your dearest friends. There will be talk, there will be rumors. Let them be." Inside, Frodo swallowed. I will need help." "No," Gandalf said at once, then paused, and the pause mattered. He saw in his mind's eye the road ahead. Dark water, lonely hills, a hands reaching out of graves. He saw Frodo's small courage and the weight that would press on it. "Yes," Gandalf corrected himself quietly. "You will need help, but not a crowd." Outside, Sam's foot slipped on a stone. The sound was small. It was enough. Gandalf's head turned. His eyes flashed toward the window with a sharpness that made Sam's skin prickle. "Samwise," Gandalf said, and there was no anger in it, only inevitability. Sam stepped into view like a culprit called into court, cheeks flaming. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Gandalf. I was only listening," Gandalf finished. "And now you will be coming with us." Sam's face went white. Then it reddened again. Then it settled into something stubborn and frightened. "If Mr. Frodo is going, then I am going." Frodo looked as if he might protest. Then relief broke through, quick as sunrise. "Sam." Gandalf nodded once, as if accepting a clause in a contract written long ago. "Pack light. Food. Cloaks. No one must see you go." He turned to Frodo. "You will leave tonight." Frodo stared. "Tonight? But the roads?" "The roads will only grow worse," Gandalf said. "Do you think evil waits politely for your convenience?" Frodo flinched at the sharpness, and Gandalf regretted it at once. He had dragged a peaceful soul into a war of ages in a single evening. He had always feared the ring's patience. Now he feared his own haste. But haste, he told himself, might be mercy. Night in the Shire had always been a gentle thing, full of owl calls and pipe smoke. That night, it carried a different scent, as if the wind had brushed over distant stone and brought back a taste of iron. Frodo locked Bag End, the key cold in his hand, and for the first time the round door looked less like a home and more like a hiding place that had failed. They did not go by the main road. Gandalf led them through lanes where the hedges leaned in, heavy with wet leaves. The earth was soft underfoot, and Frodo's breath came in little clouds. As Sam carried a pack that pulled at his shoulders like duty made physical. The ring lay on a chain under Frodo's shirt, and even through wool he felt its weight like a heartbeat that was not his. At the edge of Hobbiton, they passed the last lit windows. Music still drifted faintly from the Green Dragon, a fiddle and a laughter that did not yet know it might become a memory. Frodo turned his head, and longing tightened his throat. Gandalf watched him and said nothing. I thought the wizard knew that if Frodo looked back too much, the Shire would become an ache that the ring could use. They came to the water, dark and whispering. A small bridge arched over it, slick with moss. As they crossed, Sam shivered. "Mr. Gandalf," Sam whispered, Is there something after us?" Gandalf did not look around. He listened. Beyond the water, the night was full of ordinary sounds. A vole in the grass, a distant dog. Yet beneath it, there was a thin, almost inaudible thread of unease, like a string drawn tight. "Not yet," Gandalf said. "And if we are wise, not ever. Not yet." The phrase hung in the air, and Frodo felt the first true fear of his journey settle into him. Not yet meant there would be. They slept under a low hill among ferns, Gandalf awake longer than either hobbit. The wizard's eyes tracked the stars as if reading a map only he could see. He thought of Saruman in Orthanc, of the White Council's long debates, of his own decision to seek proof rather than act. Had that caution been wisdom or cowardice dressed as prudence? And was this sudden flight wisdom or panic? In the far south and east, in a land where dawn rose red through smoke, a different wakefulness stirred. In Barad-dûr, Sauron did not yet know the word Shire. He did not yet know the name Baggins. But the ring was no longer sitting quietly beneath a hill in the Western world. It was moving, and movement is a kind of signal. The Dark Lords will pressed outward, searching, not with eyes, but with hunger. What did the ring want? Did it want to be found, or did it want only to return? The next days passed under grey skies. They avoided villages. Gandalf led them along old tracks used by farmers and wanderers, through meadows where the grass lay wet and heavy, and over low ridges where the wind smelled of distant rain. Once, a fox watched them from a hedge, eyes bright in the dusk. It sat very still, and when it trotted away, Frodo could not shake the feeling that something had observed him through those small, clever eyes. On the third day, they reached Buckland. The Brandywine ran broad and dark, and the ferry creaked as it moved. The ferryman, a stout hobbit with a red nose, squinted at Gandalf as if trying to place him. "Out late for travellers," the ferryman said. "Business," Gandalf replied. The ferry bumped against the far bank with a hollow thud. Frodo stepped off and felt, absurdly, as if he had crossed into another country. Buckland hedges were taller, the lanes narrower, the air thicker with river damp. Meriadoc Brandybuck met them in the lane near Crickhollow, lantern in hand, hair damp from mist. He had always been quick-witted and quick to notice what others missed, and he saw Frodo's face at once. "You are leaving," Merry said, not asking. Frodo tried to smile. Just a little journey. Merry's gaze slid to Gandalf, then to Sam's pack, then back to Frodo. In the middle of the night, with the wizard. That is not a mushroom hunt." Gandalf watched Merry for a long moment. In Merry's eyes was a loyalty that was more dangerous than any enemy, because it would not be dissuaded by reason. "It is better if you remain," Gandalf said. Merry's chin lifted. Better for whom? For you, Gandalf thought. Better for your years. Better for your laugh. Better for the Shire that might still have you. But Merry stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There have been strangers," he said. "Tall folk. They ask questions about Bilbo, about Bag End, and they are not from Bree." Frodo's stomach tightened. "Strangers." Merry nodded once. "I saw one at the edge of the Haygate, hooded. He did not walk like a hobbit. He did not smell like a hobbit either. He smelled like wet leather and old smoke." Gandalf felt the hair at the back of his neck rise. "Not yet," he had said. And yet the world had already begun to answer. "How long ago?" Gandalf asked. "Yesterday," Merry whispered, and then he was gone. Gandalf's mind moved like lightning, connecting possibilities. Sauron did not know the Shire, but Saruman had eyes and ears in the north. And there were other powers that sniffed at rumor. A tale of Bilbo's vanishing trick had spread far. In taverns, men loved a marvel. Marvels draw the wrong kind of attention. Merry's voice softened. "If you are going, Frodo, do not leave me behind like a child." For a moment, Frodo looked as if he might refuse, might cling to the plan of secrecy. And then he looked at Merry's face and saw the truth. Merry would follow anyway, and he would do it without Gandalf's guidance, without knowledge, and he would die in a ditch with his courage wasted. "All right," Frodo said, voice hoarse. "You come." The lantern shook slightly in Merry's hand, not from fear, but from joy that had been denied and then granted. "And Pippin?" he asked at once. Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "No." Merry opened his mouth to argue. A voice came from the dark behind the hedge. Too late. Peregrine Took emerged, hair tousled, cheeks flushed with the cold. He grinned as if this were a prank, but his eyes were bright with worry. "If you think I would let Merry have an adventure without me, you do not know Merry very well." Gandalf closed his eyes briefly, as if counting to 10. When he opened them, there was resignation, and beneath it a flicker of something like tenderness. "So be it," he said. "But you will do as you are told, each of you. The road is not a storybook, and it does not care how charming you are." They left Buckland before dawn. The old forest lay like a dark thought on the edge of the Shire, and Gandalf chose to skirt it, taking the long way over open ground. He did not trust trees that remembered older wars. The land rolled away in soft hills, and morning came pale and watery. A thin drizzle began, turning cloaks heavy. They made for Bree. The first turning point came on the road, under a sky the colour of bruised steel. A farmer's cart stood half in a ditch, one wheel broken. The farmer, a broad man with mud on his boots, was bent over the axle, cursing softly. His wife stood beside him, holding a crying child. Gandalf halted. "Do not stop," Sam whispered, eyes on the open fields. "Mr. Gandalf, we should not stop." Gandalf hesitated. He had chosen haste, and haste demanded cruelty. Yet the sight of the child's red face and the woman's helpless hands pierced him. He stepped forward. "Let me," Gandalf said, and placed his staff against the axle. He spoke a word under his breath. The wood creaked, the wheels shifted. The axle slid back into place as if it had never broken. The farmer stared, mouth open. "Wizardry," he breathed. "Only a little," Gandalf replied. "Go quickly. Do not linger on the road after dusk." The woman clutched her child tighter. "Why?" Gandalf looked at the horizon, where rain blurred the world. "Because the night is growing teeth," he said, and he left them with that sentence like a curse and a warning. As they walked on, Frodo glanced back. The farmer and his family were hurrying away, cart rattling. The ordinary lives of men moved through the world without knowing the old wars had begun to shift beneath their feet. Frodo felt suddenly small, and the ring under his shirt felt suddenly vast. Near evening, they reached a low rise and saw Bree in the distance, a cluster of lights under a hill, smoke curling from chimneys. Warmth, beds, a stew, the illusion of safety. Gandalf did not relax. Bree was a crossroads, and crossroads are where stories collide. Inside the prancing pony, the air was thick with the smell of ale and wet wool. Firelight flickered on faces. Men with weathered cheeks, hobbits with round eyes, a few strangers in dark cloaks. Voices rose and fell in a constant murmur, laughter laced with gossip. Barlaman Butterbur blinked at Gandalf as if he had seen a ghost. "Mr. Gandalf, sir, you are early this year." "This is not a social call," Gandalf said, and his tone made Butterbur's hands fumble with his towel. Frodo sat near the hearth, trying to seem ordinary. Merry and Pippin were already drawing glances, their tookish brightness hard to hide. Sam sat close to Frodo, eyes darting, listening to every word. And in the shadows near the wall, a tall man watched them. He did not wear a hood. He did not try to hide. He was simply there, like a piece of the room that had always belonged. His face was lean, his eyes grey and sharp. Gandalf felt him before he saw him, the way one feels a storm front. He turned. The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging without greeting. "Strider," Butterbur muttered under his breath, as if the name were a charm against trouble. Frodo's hand went unconsciously toward his shirt, toward the ring. He remembered Bilbo's stories, half-joking tales of rangers and wild men. Now the tales had stepped into the firelight. The man rose and came to their table. His boots were worn, his cloak patched. He smelled of rain and smoke and a cold, clean scent like pine. "Gandalf," he said quietly, "you move sooner than expected." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "And you know too much for a man who claims to be merely a wanderer." The man's mouth twitched. "You are not the only one who watches roads." Frodo looked between them, confused. "You know each other?" Gandalf hesitated. In the true tale, he would have left Frodo in the Shire and returned later to Bree, missing Strider by chance and arranging help by letter. In this altered road, everything that had been carefully spaced by time was colliding at once. "This is Aragorn, son of Arathorn," Gandalf said at last. "He is a friend." Aragorn's gaze fell on Frodo, and something softened in it, a grief held in check. "So this is the ring-bearer," he murmured, and Frodo felt as if an unseen hand had brushed his skin. Frodo stiffened. "You know about it?" Aragorn glanced at Gandalf. "Rumors travel, and my people listen. There are shadows moving in the north that have not moved in many years." Gandalf's jaw tightened. "Not the Nine," he said, more to himself than to Aragorn. "Not yet." Aragorn's voice dropped. "Perhaps not. But there are other hunters, men who serve without knowing what they serve. And there are wolves that walk on two legs." Gandalf felt the shape of a trap forming around them, not because the enemy had planned it, but because the world itself bent toward the ring. That night, as the inn settled into uneasy sleep, the second turning point came like a knife through cloth. A scream tore the corridor. Sam bolted upright, heart pounding. Frodo was already on his feet, hand on the hilt of the small sword Bilbo had left him, the blade catching faint moonlight. Gandalf threw open the door. The corridor smelled of sweat and fear. Butterbur stood at the far end, lantern shaking, face drained of colour. "They are in the rooms," Butterbur stammered. "Strangers. Big as trees." Aragorn appeared soundlessly beside Gandalf, sword in hand. "Not riders," he whispered, listening. "Something else." They moved fast, feet silent on wood. In the room where the hobbits had been meant to sleep, the window was shattered inward. Rain blew in, cold and sharp. The bed was slashed open, feathers drifting like snow. A dark figure lay on the floor, twitching. Merry stumbled forward, then froze. "That is Bill Ferny," he breathed, recognizing the sore-faced man who had always seemed too mean for Bree. Bill Ferny's eyes were wide. His throat was cut so cleanly that blood pulsed in time with his heartbeat, dark and thick. His mouth opened as if to speak, and only a wet gasp came out. He died with a look of surprise, as if he had believed himself untouchable. Aragorn crouched, touching the blood with 2 fingers. "Fresh," he said. Gandalf's gaze went to the window, to the rain-smeared darkness beyond. "Someone killed him," Gandalf murmured, to silence him or to punish him. Frodo's voice trembled. "For what?" Aragorn looked up, eyes hard. "For selling words," he said. For telling someone that hobbits were traveling with a wizard. Sam's stomach turned. He had always thought betrayal came with villainous laughter. Here it was, a cut throat in a cheap room and feathers floating in the rain. Gandalf's mind raced. If not the Nine, then who? Saruman's agents? Men in league with darker powers? The ring did not need the Nazgûl to sow death. It needed only desire and fear. Gandalf turned sharply. "We leave," he said. "Now, before dawn. We do not stay to be questioned." Butterburst's lantern bobbed. "But Mr. Gandalf, lock your doors," Gandalf snapped, "and do not speak of us. If anyone asks, you saw nothing." Outside Bree, the road east grew lonelier. The weather hills rose like the backs of sleeping beasts. Wind swept across them, carrying the scent of wet stone and distant lightning. Frodo's feet ached, and yet he did not complain. His fear had become a kind of fuel. They did not climb Weathertop. Aragorn urged them around it, through a shallow valley where thorn bushes clutched at cloaks. "High places draw eyes," Aragorn said, and Gandalf did not argue. Once, in the late afternoon, they saw riders on a distant ridge. Not black-cloaked phantoms, men on horses, silhouettes against a pale sky. Too many to be a simple patrol. They moved with purpose, scanning the road. "Who are they?" a Pippin whispered. Aragorn's face was grim. "Men who have chosen coin over conscience," he said, "and perhaps they think they hunt thieves, or perhaps they have been told to look for a small folk with a great prize." Gandalf watched the riders until they vanished. He felt a cold anger. Saruman, he thought. Only Saruman had the reach to set men searching without revealing his hand. Saruman, who had always smiled and spoken of patience while his desire grew like mold in a sealed room. Gandalf had not gone to Orthanc to ask counsel. He had not yet met Saruman's eyes and heard the honeyed lies. He had not yet been imprisoned on a high tower and forced to choose between pride and humility. In this road, Saruman would not have that victory, but Saruman might have another. They reached the last bridge, and the land beyond felt older, emptier. The air grew colder. The trees stood bare in places, branches like bones. At night, they camped under a rocky overhang. Gandalf set a small fire shielded by stones, and the flame cast a warm circle in the dark. The hobbits huddled close, the damp seeping into their cloaks. Frodo watched the fire and finally asked the question that had been swelling in him for days. "Gandalf," he said softly, "why did you change your mind? Why did we leave so quickly?" Gandalf's eyes reflected the firelight. For a moment, he looked older than his years, and for a moment his voice carried a weight that made even Aragorn glance up. "Because I felt it," Gandalf said, "and because I have seen what happens when people who ought to act wait for certainty instead." Frodo swallowed. "And if we are wrong?" Gandalf's gaze went to the darkness beyond the fire. "Then we will have frightened ourselves for nothing," he said. "But if we are right, and we had stayed, and the Shire would have become a grave with green grass on top." Sam's hands clenched on his knees. Merry stared into the flames, jaw tight. Pippin, for once, said nothing. Above them, clouds moved across the stars like slow smoke. Far away, in Orthanc, Saruman stood before the Palantir. His white robes were spotless, his hands were steady. His voice, when he spoke, was calm. "It is moving," he murmured to the Seeing Stone. "It is in the wild." He did not yet know it was the one. He suspected. He had studied ring lore longer than any living man. He had told himself he sought it to keep it from Sauron. Yet each year that passed had added another layer of justification to his desire, until desire itself wore the mask of duty. In the Palantir depths, he saw fragments: a grey cloak on a road, a small figure with a chain at his neck, a flash of gold like a fish under dark water. Saruman's breath caught. His heart, which had once been devoted to order and craft, beat faster. "Send them," he said, and not to any visible servant, but to the air, to the web he had spun. "Find them. Bring me the halfling." In the Shire, weeks after Frodo's departure, rain fell gently on fields that did not yet know they were part of a war. At Bag End, the windows were shuttered. The garden went slightly wild. Lobelia Sackville Baggins walked past the gate with her umbrella and sniffed as if she could smell scandal. "There is something queer," she muttered to Otho. "Mark my words." At night, strange men began to appear at the outskirts, asking questions with forced smiles. They bought ale at inns and listened too closely. They paid children for gossip. They walked the lanes with boots that left deeper prints than hobbit feet should. Old Hamfast Gamgee looked at one such man in the Bywater Road and felt, for no reason he could explain, that winter had entered his bones. "Elves and dragons," he grumbled at the gaffer, "and now big folk sniffing round our doors. This comes of wizards." The Shire did not panic. It did not know how. It only tightened like a drawn thread. In Rivendell, Elrond felt the change before the travellers arrived. The Bruinen ran cold and swift, and the wind in the pine trees carried a warning. He stood on a terrace as dawn broke, pale gold on the valley, and he listened to the song of the water. When Gandalf appeared at the ford with 4 hobbits and a ranger, Elrond's eyes sharpened. "You come with haste," Elrond said, greeting Gandalf with a grave embrace. His gaze fell on Frodo, and it held both kindness and sorrow. "And you bring a burden that does not belong in any hand." Frodo's throat tightened. He had dreamed of Rivendell as a place of rest and beauty. It was beautiful, but the beauty felt like a sanctuary built on the edge of a battlefield. Gandalf did not waste time with pleasantries. In Elrond's hall, under carved pillars and tapestries that seemed to hold starlight in their threads, Gandalf placed the ring on a table. Elrond did not touch it. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if he could see through gold into the memory of fire. "Where did you get this?" Elrond asked, though he already knew the shape of the answer. Gandalf spoke of Bilbo's finding, of Gollum's riddle game, of Frodo's vanishing, of the pressure in the air. He admitted with a frankness that surprised even him that he had not proven it. "I did not go to Minas Tirith," Gandalf said. "I did not search the records. I did not test it in fire." Elrond's expression did not change, but something in the room tightened. "Then you have brought us either a terrible danger," Elrond said, "or a terrible mistake." Gandalf met his gaze. "I have brought you what I fear is the One Ring." A silence fell that felt heavier than stone. Aragorn's hand went unconsciously to the shard of a broken sword he carried wrapped in cloth. Merry and Pippin sat very still, suddenly aware that they had stepped into the deep end of history. Sam stared at the ring as if it might bite him. Elrond's voice was quiet. "We will know," he said. He ordered a small fire lit in a brazier. He placed the ring on a metal tray and held it over the flame with tongs. The gold did not change. It did not glow. It did not melt. It sat as if fire were irrelevant. Then, slowly, letters began to appear on its surface, like red embers under skin. A script that was beautiful in its precision and horrifying in its meaning. The black speech curled around the ring like a serpent. Sam's breath hitched. Frodo felt as if his heart were being squeezed. Elrond read the words aloud, and even in his fair voice they sounded like smoke. "One ring to rule them all," Elrond said. "One ring to find them." When he finished, the room seemed colder. Gandalf closed his eyes. Proof at last. And proof came with a kind of despair, because proof removed hope of misunderstanding. Elrond lifted the ring away from the fire and set it down. The letters faded, leaving only plain gold, as if it had never confessed anything. 17 years of quiet would not have changed this, Elrond said softly. Gandalf's mouth tightened. But it might have changed the world's readiness, he replied, and there was bitterness there. He had moved sooner, and now he would learn what haste brought. The council was called. Not all the faces that would one day sit in that circle were present. Time had not yet nudged some into motion. Yet enough came. Elrond, Gandalf, Aragorn, Glorfindel like a bright blade in human form, and messengers who had ridden hard from the south and west. From the lonely mountain came word of dwarves uneasy in their halls. From Lothlorien came a whisper of shadow lengthening beyond the Anduin. No one spoke lightly. Even the air in the chamber seemed to listen. They debated what should be done with the ring, and in the debate, the third turning point rose like a tempting door. "Send it west," said one elf lord. "Voice like wind through leaves. Let it pass over sea with our ships. Let it leave Middle-earth forever." For a moment, the idea hung in the air like a promise. Frodo felt his chest loosen. The sea was a word of distance and endings. If the ring could simply go away, could not this nightmare end before it began? Elrond's eyes were sorrowful. "It cannot be so simple," he said. "It is bound to this world. Even if it went to Aman, would we dare bring such poison to the undying lands? And if the Valar refused it, would we cast it into the sea and hope it never rises? Hope is not a plan." Gandalf's voice cut in, low and intense. "And even if it could be taken west," he said, "what of the years before it is gone? Would Sauron sit idle while the ring slipped beyond his grasp? He would strike. He would strike at everything we love, out of spite if nothing else." A question formed in the minds of all who listened, though only Frodo felt it like a physical weight. If the ring could not be hidden, and could not be sent away, and could not be wielded, what remained? Aragorn spoke, and when he spoke, the room seemed to straighten. "It must be destroyed," he said. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water, the ripples spreading outward, touching every face. Destroyed. There was only one place where that could be done. Mordor. Merry swallowed hard. Pippin's hands clenched on his knees. Sam looked at Frodo, eyes wide, as if trying to imagine Frodo walking into a land of ash. Elrond's gaze rested on Frodo with a weight that felt like a crown. "The burden falls to you," Elrond said, "for it came to you, and it is your doom to bear it if you will." Frodo's mouth was dry. He thought of Bag End, of the smell of tilled earth, of tea steam rising on a summer morning. He thought of the Shire's softness. He thought of the road, wet and cold, and the dead man in Bree with feathers in his blood. A part of him wanted to refuse. A A part of him wanted to run until his lungs burst. Yet another part, quiet and stubborn, rose. "I will take it," Frodo said, voice shaking, "though I do not know the way." Gandalf's eyes closed for a heartbeat, and when they opened, there was grief and pride braided together. He stepped forward. "Then I will go with you," Gandalf said. In the true history, he would have gone anyway, but his going here carried a different weight. He had chosen haste, and now he chose commitment. He would not leave Frodo to stumble into darkness alone. Thus, the Fellowship was formed earlier than the world expected, before many pieces had moved into place. Aragorn, Gandalf, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin were certain. Others were debated. Elrond sent Glorfindel for a time, knowing that a bright presence could drive back lesser shadows, but also knowing that too much brightness drew fire. No dwarf from Erebor came, for the message had not yet travelled far enough. No Boromir came, and for Gondor's dream had not yet driven him north. The company was smaller, faster, and in some ways more fragile. They left Rivendell under a clear sky, the mountains ahead white with early snow. The air bit their cheeks, and their breath rose like smoke. Elrond watched them go, and in his heart was a sorrow older than the Second Age. He had seen too many small folk crushed between great powers. He feared that haste, even for noble reasons, might break them before Mordor did. They crossed the troll shores, where stone shapes crouched in gullies like frozen nightmares. They climbed higher, into wind and thin air. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, swirling in eddies that hid the path. On a narrow pass, the storm hit like a living thing. It howled, filling ears and mouths with ice. The hobbits stumbled, numb fingers clutching cloaks. Sam's lips were blue. Gandalf fought the wind, staff planted like a mast. He spoke words of fire, and a small warmth formed around them, a pocket of survivable air. Yet even as he worked, he felt resistance, as if the storm were not wholly natural. Aragorn leaned close, shouting over the roar. "This feels like a will," he said. Gandalf's eyes flashed. "It is," he shouted back, and in his mind, he saw Saruman's pale hands weaving weather like a net. They were too early for Saruman to have raised a war, but not too early for him to reach out with spite. "Turn back." Saruman's voice seemed to hiss in the wind, though no voice truly sounded. "Give it to me. I alone can keep it." Frodo clutched his chest, feeling the ring pulse against his skin like a second heart. The storm howled, and for a moment he imagined simply lying down, letting the snow cover him, letting the world end quietly. Sam grabbed his arm. "Mr. Frodo!" he shouted, face wet with melted snow. "Keep moving!" They retreated from the pass, half sliding, half crawling, until the mountains eased their grip. In a sheltered hollow, Gandalf's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. He looked at the others, faces raw with cold, eyes frightened. He had chosen a smaller company for speed, and now the mountain had nearly killed them anyway. He felt time like a predator behind them, and he felt another predator ahead. "What now?" Merry asked, voice thin. Aragorn looked south. "We could try the Gap of Rohan," he said. "Avoid the mountains." Gandalf's jaw tightened. "And walk near Isengard," he said, and there was poison in the word. Aragorn met his gaze. "Or we go under," Aragorn said quietly, "through Moria." The name fell like a stone. Even the hobbits had heard tales of darkness under mountains. Sam's voice trembled. Moria is full of orcs. Perhaps, Gandalf said. Perhaps it is empty. Perhaps it is worse than orcs. Here was another possible ending. They could turn back, hide the ring in Rivendell, fortify the valley, wait for allies, wait for Denethor's son to arrive, wait for the world to be ready. It would be wise. It would also give Saruman and Sauron time to close every road. Gandalf made the choice that defined this altered age. "We go under," he said. The doors of Durin stood silent beside a black lake. The water was still, reflecting the stars like a mirror that did not blink. Cold rose from it, and the air smelled of stone and old dust. Gandalf spoke the password, and the doors opened with a sigh like a tomb yielding. As they entered, darkness swallowed them. The sound of their footsteps became loud, echoing off unseen walls. Their torches cast small trembling circles of light, and beyond the light was only depth. They walked for hours through halls that had once rung with hammers and song. Now the only music was dripping water and the occasional scuttle of something small and unseen. In the great chamber where once dwarves had feasted, they found bones. Not ancient bones, recent. A skull still held scraps of dried flesh. The smell was faint, but present. Pippin gagged and turned away. Aragorn's face was hard. "Orcs," he murmured. Gandalf's grip tightened on his staff. He felt the ring's presence like a beacon in his mind, and he felt other minds stirring in response. They camped among toppled stones. Gandalf tried to sleep and could not. In the darkness, he thought he heard whispers, not in any language, but in the tone of desire. The ring desired, and the world answered. They moved on. The drums began far away, a dull heartbeat that grew louder. Boom, boom, boom. Dust fell from the ceiling in fine grey sheets. The hobbits froze, eyes wide. Aragorn's voice was tight. "They have found us." Orcs poured into the hall like a black flood. Their eyes glinted in torchlight, their blades catching sparks. They shrieked, a sound like metal scraping bone. Gandalf raised his staff, and white fire flared, blasting the first wave back. Aragorn's sword sang as it cut. The hobbits fought as hobbits fight, with terror and courage tangled together, stabbing low, ducking under swings, holding on because there was nothing else. Sam stayed near Frodo like a shield made of flesh. "Do not put it on," Sam shouted over the noise, seeing Frodo's hand drift toward his chest. "Do not." Frodo's fingers curled away, trembling. The ring seemed to hum, urging him, promising invisibility, escape. Would not escape be mercy? Would not a single moment of vanishing save them all? A huge orc lunged at Frodo, spear aimed for his belly. Merry threw himself in front of it, blade catching the spear shaft. The impact knocked Merry backward, and the spear grazed his side, slicing cloth and skin. Blood darkened his shirt. Merry gasped, pain flashing across his face. Frodo screamed his name and drove his own sword forward. The blade plunged into the orc's thigh. The creature howled, staggering. Aragorn pulled Frodo back, a voice fierce. "Move! Run!" They fled, feet slapping stone, orc cries echoing behind. They reached a narrow bridge spanning a chasm so deep the torchlight could not find the bottom. The air rising from it smelled of cold earth and something older. They crossed one by one, and on the far side Gandalf turned, staff raised. The orcs surged onto the bridge, and behind them something else moved, a shadow within shadow. The air grew hot. a deep growl rolled through the hall, not from a throat, but from the stone itself. The Balrog emerged, a figure of flame and darkness, wings of smoke unfurling. Its eyes burned like coals in a skull of night. The hobbits froze, terror turning them into statues. Gandalf's face went very still. In the true tale, he would fall here, breaking the bridge, dragging the demon into the abyss, dying so that others might live. That sacrifice had shaped the age. Would haste change even this? Gandalf looked at Frodo, as at the small figure clutching his chest, eyes wide, lips trembling. He looked at Sam, blood on his hands, refusing to leave. He looked at Aragorn, grim and ready to die. Then Gandalf did something that shocked even the Balrog, as if it had expected a familiar script. He did not stand alone. Aragorn stepped beside him on the bridge, sword raised, eyes blazing. "You shall not pass," Aragorn said, not as a spell, but as a vow. For a moment, hope flared, 2 against 1, light and steel. The Balrog laughed, a sound like burning wood, and its whip snapped out. The lash wrapped around Aragorn's arm. There was a jerk, brutal and sudden. Aragorn stumbled, and the shard of Narsil slipped from his grip, clattering on stone. "Aragorn!" Frodo cried. Gandalf's eyes widened. This was the unexpected cost. The Balrog had not changed, but the pattern had. Aragorn had stepped into a place that had once been empty, and the shadow answered. Gandalf roared a word of power. White light burst from his staff, severing the whip. Aragorn tore free, arm bleeding, face contorted with pain. But the moment had been enough. The Balrog's sword rose, flame licking along its edge, and it struck at the bridge. Stone cracked. The bridge shuddered. Gandalf knew the next heartbeat would decide everything. If the bridge fell with them on it, all would perish. If it fell with the Balrog on it, perhaps the others might live. He met Aragorn's gaze, and there was a silent exchange, a passing of responsibility. "Take them," Gandalf said, voice low and absolute. Aragorn shook his head. "Gandalf!" Gandalf's eyes flashed. "Go!" He struck the bridge with his staff, a blow that sounded like thunder. The stones split. The center of the bridge collapsed. The Balrog plunged, roaring, flame trailing into darkness, and Gandalf, instead of falling with it, leaped backward at the last instant, landing hard on the far side. He staggered, nearly dropping his staff, but he was alive. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The abyss breathed cold air upward. Dust drifted down like grey snow. Then Gandalf exhaled, and it sounded like a man who had cheated fate. Aragorn grabbed him, steadying him. "You live," Aragorn whispered, as if afraid saying it might break the spell. Gandalf's face was pale. "For now," he said, and his voice carried no triumph. He had saved himself, but he had also broken something. The world felt wronger, as if a story had been rewritten mid-sentence. They escaped Moria into the golden woods of Lothlorien, and the contrast was almost unbearable. Sunlight filtered through Malorn leaves, turning the air green and gold. The scent of flowers and clean water washed over them, and for a moment the hobbits wept, not from sadness alone, but from relief so sharp it hurt. Galadriel met them beside a stream. Her eyes were deep, reflecting starlight even in day. She looked at Gandalf with quiet surprise. "You come through the darkness," she said, "and yet you do not bear the mark of death that I expected." Gandalf bowed his head slightly, as if ashamed. "The bridge broke," he said simply, "but I did not." Galadriel's gaze moved to Aragorn's bleeding arm, to Merry's bandaged side, to Frodo's drawn face. Then it settled on Frodo, and Frodo felt as if she saw the ring through cloth and bone. "You have come too soon," Galadriel said softly, and it was not accusation. It was mourning for a world that had not had time to gather its defenses. She offered them rest, and they took it like starving people. For days, they ate bread that tasted of sun and honey, and drank clear water that seemed to wash fear from their veins. The hobbits slept in flets high among branches, wind rocking them like cradles. Yet even in Lorien, the ring worked. Frodo dreamed of an eye opening in a tower of smoke, and he woke with his hand clutching his chest. Merry's wound festered slightly, and Galadriel's healers frowned, whispering that darkness clung to the cut as if a shadow had brushed the blade that made it. In that time, far away, another thread tightened. Gollum, deep under the mountains, had not yet been captured and questioned by Sauron. He had been creeping in dark tunnels for years, calling for his precious, and his calling had become a kind of prayer to hunger. The absence of the ring was a wound that never stopped bleeding. Then, as Frodo walked under Malin leaves, the ring's pull brushed across the world like a ripple. Gollum froze in his cave, head cocked, mouth open, saliva glistening. He felt it, not the location, not a clear direction, but the throb of existence, the taste of what had been stolen. He began to move that very night, crawling out into the world sooner than he ever had in the true history, driven by a scent only he could taste. Time, once stretched, now snapped forward. Galadriel called Gandalf aside, and in the quiet beneath the trees, she spoke with the clarity of one who had watched ages pass. "You have avoided one sacrifice," she said. "But do you think you have avoided its price?" Gandalf's face tightened. "Is there always a price?" he asked, and it was one of the few times he sounded tired. Galadriel's eyes held him. "The shadow is patient," she said. "If it cannot claim one life, it will claim another." When they left Lorien, they did so with gifts, and with the feeling of being watched by kindness that could not follow. They took boats down the Anduin, the river cold beneath them, banks sliding past like dark curtains. The days were bright, the nights sharp with stars. Then, at the turning of the river, arrows hissed from the eastern shore. Orcs, but not the ragged kind that had chased them in Moria. These were stronger, better armed, moving in tight groups. On their shields was a white hand, Saruman's mark. "How?" Merry whispered, ducking as an arrow thunked into the boat's side. Gandalf's eyes flashed. "He moves quickly," he said, voice like stone. "Quicker than I feared." Saruman's betrayal in this altered road had ripened sooner, fed by Gandalf's early flight and the Palantir's glimpses. Saruman had not needed years to fall. He had only needed certainty that the prize was real. The boats lurched as Aragorn steered toward the western bank. Sam paddled frantically, face set. Frodo crouched low, heart pounding, and the ring heavy as lead. An arrow struck Pippin in the shoulder. He cried out, collapsing into Merry's arms. Blood soaked his sleeve, bright against hobbit cloth. "Pippin!" Merry screamed, voice cracking. They made land in a rush, dragging boats onto mud, scrambling into reeds. Orcs shouted across the river, and some began to cross downstream, splashing, snarling. Aragorn pressed a hand to Pippin's wound. "We cannot stay," he said grimly. They will surround us." Pippin's face was pale, sweat on his brow. "I can walk," he lied. Gandalf looked south, toward the Immin Muil and the long road ahead. He felt the net tightening. Saruman's hand was reaching farther. Sauron's attention, still not fully focused, would sharpen as blood was spilled. And in the west, in the Shire, ruffians began to arrive. They came in twos and threes at first, rough men with hard eyes claiming they were only travelers. They bought land with coin that smelled of old vaults. They bullied hobbits in markets. They took over mills and inns. Bywater's air changed. The scent of baking and pipe smoke mixed with the stink of sweat and cheap ale. Children stopped playing in certain lanes. Doors began to be barred at dusk. Old Hamfast heard that Bag End had been confiscated by a party of men who claimed authority from Sharky. He stood in his garden, hands shaking, rage mixing with fear. "Mr. Frodo," he whispered into the wind, though Frodo was far away. "What have they done?" The Shire began to fall without a battle because it had never learned how to fight and because its guardians were gone. This was the betrayal Gandalf had not predicted. Not a single traitor in their ranks, but the slow theft of home while heroes chased a doom far away. On the riverbank, Gandalf made another hard choice. They could flee east toward the dead marshes, slipping toward Mordor before Saruman could fully close the net. Or they could turn south and seek aid, rallying Rohan and Gondor earlier than in the true tale, forcing the world to wake. What is the cost of waking the world too soon? Gandalf wondered, and the question was not rhetorical for once. It was a knife poised over every life. He chose to split their path. Aragorn would take Merry and the wounded Pippin west and south to seek riders, to warn Rohan. Gandalf would take Frodo and Sam east, toward the Shadow, trying to slip through before the great powers could align against them. It was a dangerous division, but speed demanded it, and Saruman had already proven that a single company was too visible. Frodo's eyes filled with tears at the thought of parting. Merry gripped his hand hard. "Do not you dare die," Merry said, voice rough. Pippin managed a weak grin, pain tightening his face. "Bring back a souvenir," he whispered, then hissed as Merry jostled his wound. Sam looked torn, glancing at Merry and Pippin, then back to Frodo. His loyalty snapped into place like a hinge. "I go where Mr. Frodo goes," he said simply. Aragorn clasped Gandalf's forearm. "If Saruman has begun this," Aragorn said low, "then we race not one enemy, but two." Gandalf's eyes were grim. "And the third," he replied, and both of them knew he meant the ring itself. They parted under a sky that had gone strangely clear, the river whispering behind them. The story now ran on parallel tracks, and Middle-earth felt the strain. Aragorn, Merry, and Pippin moved through the Westlands under grey skies, hiding by day, travelling by night. Pippin's fever rose. At one point, in a thicket near the borders of Dunland, Pippin began to shake violently, teeth chattering. "I am cold," he whispered. Merry held him, tears silent on his cheeks. "You are not dying," Merry said fiercely. "You are not." Aragorn's hands were sure as he mixed herbs and pressed them to the wound. Yet even Aragorn's skill could not undo an arrow that had been dipped in something foul. Saruman's servants had learned dark crafts quickly. On the third night, Pippin's eyes opened wide and unfocused. He looked at Merry as if seeing him from far away. "Merry," he whispered, "do you hear water?" "There is no water," Merry said, voice breaking. Pippin smiled faintly. It sounds nice. Then his breath stopped. Merry made a sound that was not a word. He shook Pippin's shoulder as if he could shake life back into him. He pressed his forehead to Pippin's and sobbed silently, body trembling. Aragorn stood over them, face rigid, grief burning behind his eyes. He had seen death many times, but a hobbit's death felt like a sacrilege, as if the world itself had violated something gentle. They buried Pippin under stones because the ground was too hard to dig. Merry placed Pippin's small cloak over the stones, tucking it around them as if tucking in a child. "This is your haste," Merry spat at the empty air one night, voice raw, as if speaking to Gandalf across miles. "This is what it buys." Aragorn heard him and said nothing, because there was no comfort that would not sound like insult. Meanwhile, Gandalf and Frodo and Sam moved east through rougher land, climbing over broken hills, descending into stony valleys where wind moaned through cracks. They avoided roads. They drank from cold streams and ate lembas that grew harder to swallow each day, not because it tasted bad, but because fear made the throat tight. They met a man on the borders of the Brownlands, a lone traveller with a donkey and sacks of salt fish. His beard was grey, his hands chapped. He blinked at their sudden emergence from the rocks. "Travellers," he said cautiously, "you are far from any inn." Gandalf studied him, weighing risk and need. The man smelled of honest labour and old grief, yet even honest men could be used. "What news?" Gandalf asked. The man shrugged. "Orcs in the night," he said. "Not here, but east. People say the shadow grows. I have heard talk of Isengard sending men to buy grain. Buy it cheap, they say, with threats if you do not." Sam's face tightened. Even here, far from the Shire, Saruman's reach was felt in the price of bread. The man looked at Frodo, and his gaze lingered on Frodo's chest, not seeing the ring, but perhaps sensing something. His eyes narrowed, not with greed, but with fear. "You carry trouble," the man said. "I have seen it before, in soldiers with haunted eyes. If you can, I'll leave it behind." Frodo's voice was small. "If only we could." They move on, leaving the man standing in the wind, donkey braying softly. Ordinary lives again, brushed by great doom and left trembling. In the dead marshes, the air stank of rot and old water. Fog hugged the ground, cold and wet, and every step sucked at boots. Lights flickered beneath the surface, pale faces staring up from mud, mouths open in silent screams. Sam gagged, hand over his mouth. "Do not look," he whispered to himself, and then looked anyway. Frodo walked as if in a trance. The ring felt heavier here, as if the marsh itself recognized it and leaned toward it. At night, Gandalf lit no fire. They huddled in darkness, listening to the distant cries of strange birds. And then, one night, Sam woke to a sound like wet breathing. He sat up, heart hammering, and saw a shape crouched at the edge of their little hollow. Big eyes, thin limbs, skin like old parchment. Gollum. He stared at Frodo with a hunger so raw it seemed to fill the air. His mouth moved silently at first, then words spilled out like drool. "Precious," he whispered. "We smells it, we feels it. It came back into the world." Sam lunged, grabbing a rock, but Gollum darted back with a hiss. Gandalf rose in one smooth motion, staff leveled. "Stand!" Gandalf commanded. Gollum froze, trembling, eyes darting. "Nice wizard," he crooned, voice cracking. "We only wants to look." We only want our own." Frodo sat up, breathing hard. Seeing Gollum was like seeing the ring's future made flesh. It was a revelation delivered in filth and hunger. This was what the ring did to those who held it too long. "Why are you here?" Frodo whispered. Gollum's eyes widened, almost pleading. "Because it called," he said. "Because it wants to be found. It wants to go home." Gandalf's face hardened. In the true tale, Gollum's capture and interrogation would have given Sauron the word Shire and would have unleashed the Nine. Here, Gollum had come on his own, drawn by the ring's movement. The ring was not passive. It was an active traitor. Gandalf stepped forward, and Gollum flinched. "You will lead us," Gandalf said. "You know the ways into Mordor better than any." Gollum's mouth twisted. "Yes," he hissed. "Yes, we can lead. We can help. But you must not hurt us. Promise." Frodo looked at Gandalf. Gandalf looked at Frodo, and in that glance was a whole debate. Could any promise bind a creature so broken? Could mercy be used as a chain? Frodo spoke, voice trembling but clear. "We will not hurt you," he said, and as he said it, he felt the ring pulse, as if mocking the word will. Gollum's grin was sharp. "Good," he whispered. "Good hobbit." For days, Gollum led them through secret paths, avoiding orc patrols, creeping through reeds and over slag hills. He talked to himself constantly, arguing in whispers, one voice pleading, the other snarling. Sam watched him with pure hatred. "He will betray us," Sam said one night, voice low. Gandalf's eyes were tired. "Yes," he said, "but perhaps we can choose when." That was the tragic inevitability settling in. Betrayal was not a surprise anymore. It was a scheduled event. At the Black Gate, they saw it. Towers of iron, walls of stone, orcs moving like ants. The air was thick with smoke. The very light seemed tainted, as if the sun had to fight to exist here. Frodo's knees went weak. The ring felt like it was burning his skin. Gandalf stared at the gate, and for the first time, doubt hit him like a physical blow. He had moved sooner, hoping to slip through a world not yet fully mobilized. Yet Mordor was never unguarded. Evil did not sleep, Gollum hissed. "Cannot go this way," he whispered. "They seize, they kills." Sam's voice was tight. "Then why did you bring us here?" Gollum's eyes flickered. "To show," he whispered. "So you knows. There is another way." Gandalf's gaze sharpened. "Show us." Gollum's grin returned, and it was not pleasant. "Secret stairs," he whispered. "Up, up, up, to a tunnel. Very dark, very safe." Gandalf knew in that moment that the tunnel would not be safe. He knew because Galadriel had warned him, if the shadow cannot claim one life, it will claim another. If the Balrog did not take Gandalf, something else would. If Pippin died instead, what else would be paid? Yet what choice remained? And to turn back was to doom the world more surely than any tunnel. They went to the secret stairs. The climb was brutal. Stone steps clung to a cliff face like a broken spine. Wind tore at cloaks. Below, a drop yawned into mist. Sam's hands bled from gripping rock. Frodo's breath came in sobs. At the top, the tunnel mouth gaped, a wound in the mountain. The air that flowed from it was warm and foul, smelling of decay and old webs. Gandalf stepped in first, staff lighting the darkness with a pale glow. The tunnel narrowed, walls slick. Something brushed Frodo's hair and he flinched, heart hammering. Then they saw the webs, thick, layered, blocking the passage like woven cloud. Sam's face went grey. "Spiders," he whispered, voice barely audible. Gollum's eyes gleamed in the light. Shelob, he whispered with reverence and fear. She likes nice meat. Sam lunged for him, fury exploding. You little treacherous! Gandalf's staff struck the ground, and light flared. Sam froze, panting. Gandalf's voice was cold. And later, he said, save your strength. We need it. They hacked through webs, blade, and staff, burning strands away. The smell grew worse. A skittering sound echoed, slow and deliberate, as if something large was moving toward them with confidence. Shelob emerged, vast and obscene, body gleaming, eyes clustered like dark jewels. Her stench filled the tunnel, a mix of rot and venom. She clicked her mandibles, tasting the air. Frodo froze, a ring pulsing against his chest like a scream. Gandalf raised his staff, and light blazed, white and pure. Shelob recoiled slightly, hissing. The light hurt her, but it did not drive her away. Hunger drove her more. Sam drew his sword, hands shaking so hard the blade quivered. Gollum crouched behind, whispering, Good, good. Eat them, then we takes it. The fight was chaos in a tight space. Shelob lunged, legs scraping stone, webs shooting. Gandalf's light burned her eyes, making her shriek. Frodo stumbled backward, caught in a strand, arms pinned. Sam slashed wildly, cutting Frodo free, then drove his blade into one of Shelob's legs. Black blood spilled, hot and foul. Shelob screamed, thrashing. Gandalf shouted a word, and a lance of light struck Shelob's face. She reeled, mandibles snapping. Then, in the confusion, Gollum moved. He darted toward Frodo, fingers like claws, and yanked the chain from Frodo's neck. For a heartbeat, the ring was in Gollum's hand, and his face transformed, ecstasy and madness flooding it. "My precious!" he shrieked. Frodo cried out, reaching, but Shelob's legs slammed into Frodo's side, sending him crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through him. He gasped, vision blurring. Sam turned, saw the ring in Gollum's hand, and something in him snapped. He charged. Gollum hissed and fled deeper into the tunnel, clutching the ring, laughter bubbling like poison. Gandalf made a choice in a single instant, and it was the kind of choice that divides ages. He could pursue Gollum and risk losing Frodo to Shelob, or he could save Frodo and risk losing the ring. He slammed his staff down and unleashed a burst of light so fierce that the tunnel flashed like day. Shelob screamed, recoiling, eyes burning. Gandalf grabbed Frodo, pulling him away, dragging him out of her reach. Sam hesitated, torn between chasing Gollum and staying with Frodo. Frodo's voice was a rasp. "Sam," he gasped. "Go." Sam's eyes filled with tears. He looked at Frodo, at Gandalf, then at the darkness where Gollum had vanished. "I will come back," Sam said, and his voice was a vow and a prayer. He ran. The perspective of the tale shifted with Sam, plunging into darker claustrophobia. He chased the sound of Gollum's scrambling feet, the faint glint of gold that sometimes flashed. The tunnel twisted, narrowing. The air grew hotter. Sam's lungs burned. "Give it back," Sam shouted, voice echoing. Gollum's laughter rang ahead. "No, no, never," he hissed. "We suffered. We waited. It is ours." Sam rounded a corner and saw ahead a crack of light. Not natural light. Red light, pulsing like a wound opening. He burst out onto a ledge overlooking a chasm. Beyond, in the distance, Mount Doom loomed, smoke curling into a sky of ash. The air tasted of sulfur. The ground trembled faintly, as if the earth itself shivered. Gollum stood near the edge, ring held up, swaying as if drunk on it. His eyes were wide, tears streaming down his face. For a moment, he looked less like a monster and more like a starving creature who had finally found food. Sam stepped forward, sword raised, hands shaking. "Please," Sam said, voice cracking. "Please, give it to me." Gollum's face twisted. "No," he whispered, and for an instant, a different voice seemed to flicker through him, almost human. "You do not understand. It is everything." Behind them, footsteps echoed. Not orcs. Heavy, measured. A figure appeared at the tunnel mouth. An orc captain, tall, armored, eyes cold. He had followed the commotion, drawn by instinct and orders, his gaze fixed on the ring, and greed lit his face like fire. "Mine!" the orc snarled, stepping forward. In that moment, the ring did what it had always done. It divided enemies and allies alike, turning every encounter into a fight over possession. Gollum shrieked and backed toward the edge. The orc lunged. Sam lunged too, not to kill for glory, but to keep the ring from falling into black hands. 3 bodies collided near the precipice. Sam's sword cut the orc's arm. The orc howled, swinging a fist that struck Sam's cheek, sending him reeling. Gollum bit the orc's hand with savage desperation. The orc grabbed Gollum by the throat and lifted him, choking. Gollum's fingers clenched around the ring, and he made a sound like a sob. Then the orc stumbled, footing slipping on ash. His balance shifted, and he fell backward. He dragged Gollum with him. Gollum's eyes widened in terror. His free hand clawed at the air. The ring flashed in the red light. Sam threw himself forward, grabbing for Gollum's wrist. For a heartbeat, Sam held him. Sam felt the thin bone under skin, felt the frantic pulse. He looked into Gollum's eyes and saw, impossibly, a plea. "Help us," Gollum croaked. Sam's fingers slipped, blood and sweat making everything slick. His grip failed. Gollum fell. The orc fell with him, but the orc's scream was rage. Gollum's was something else, something like relief twisted with horror. They vanished into the chasm, and a moment later, there was a flare of light from below, a deep pulse that seemed to shake the world. The ring had fallen into fire. For a heartbeat, Sam stood frozen, mouth open, not breathing. Then the ground trembled harder. A roar rose, not from any throat, but from the mountain itself, as if the earth was screaming. Sam stumbled backward, eyes wide. "No," he whispered. "Yes, it is. It is done." Behind him, Gandalf's voice echoed, faint and urgent, calling his name from somewhere in the tunnels. Sam turned and ran, tears streaming, lungs burning, the world shaking around him. In Barad-dûr, Sauron felt it. He had not fully found the Shire. He had not fully deployed the Nine to hunt the halfling. He had been gathering strength, weaving plans, tightening his grip on the east. And then, like a spear driven into his heart, the bond snapped. The ring, that which had been a constant presence in his will, vanished. For a moment, Sauron's mind went blank with shock. Then rage beyond measure erupted. The tower shook. The eye's attention flared, searching, finding nothing. And then the foundations of his power, built upon the ring's existence, began to unravel. Not instantly, not like a candle snuffed, but like a fortress whose keystone has been removed. Stones cracked, shadows screamed, orcs across Mordor howled, clutching their heads as if struck. Mount Doom erupted, fire blasting into the ash sky. The air turned red, the land convulsed. Gandalf, deep in the tunnel with Frodo, felt the tremor and understood. His eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, hope surged so sharply it was almost painful. "It is ending," Gandalf breathed. Frodo lay against the wall, bruised, eyes unfocused. "Sam," Frodo whispered, and the word was not about victory. It was about love. They found Sam crawling back through the tunnel, face streaked with ash and tears, hands scraped raw. "It fell," Sam choked out. "It fell into the fire. It is gone." Gandalf closed his eyes, relief washing over him. Relief, and then, immediately, disquiet, because victory did not erase the dead. They stumbled out into the open air as Mordor tore itself apart. Ash rained down like black snow. The sky was a boiling bruise. The ground cracked, vents spewing fire. Far away, Barad-dûr shuddered, its top collapsing, stone falling like a slow avalanche. Frodo stared, dazed. He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt empty, as if the ring had been a weight that had shaped his spine, and now his body did not know how to stand without it. Gandalf looked at Frodo and saw that the ring's absence did not instantly heal its wounds. The ring had been destroyed quickly in this road, but the trauma had been inflicted quickly too. Haste did not soften pain. It only changed its schedule. They fled, guided by luck and Gandalf's will, as the land broke around them. The air burned their throats. Sam half-carried Frodo, sobbing with exhaustion. Gandalf supported them both, staff planted, eyes fierce. When at last they reached safer ground beyond Mordor's worst convulsions, they collapsed on rocky soil under a sky that was slowly, grudgingly turning from red to grey. They had done it. The impossible had happened sooner than anyone would have believed. Relief came like a wave. Then the names of the dead began to surface like stones in a shallow river. Pippin, Gollum, twisted and tragic, finally reunited with the thing that ruined him, falling with it into fire. The countless unnamed who had suffered because Saruman moved sooner, and the Shire was left unguarded. Aragorn and Merry, far away, did not know yet. They were still running, still bleeding, while still grieving Pippin under cold stars, still driven by the belief that Frodo might already be dead. And in the Shire, ruffians still held mills and inns. Victory in Mordor did not instantly uproot evil planted in soft soil. The Shire had been wounded, and wounds take time to heal, and some scars never fade. Weeks later, Gandalf found Aragorn and Merry near the borders of Rohan. Aragorn looked gaunt, eyes shadowed. Merry looked older, grief carved into his face. When Gandalf told them the ring was destroyed, Aragorn's knees nearly buckled. He gripped a fence post, breathing hard, as if his body had been holding itself upright on sheer will. Merry stared at Gandalf, expression blank. "Then Pippin died for nothing," he said, voice flat. Gandalf's face tightened. "No," he said softly. "He died because Saruman moved sooner, because the shadow reached farther, because our choices carry consequences we cannot see in advance." Merry's eyes filled with tears. "That sounds like nothing," he whispered. Gandalf stepped closer, and his voice was quiet, meant only for Merry. "It sounds like nothing, because grief makes all explanations taste like ash," he said. "But Pippin died as himself, not as a slave, not as a wraith. He died loved. That is not nothing." Merry looked away, jaw trembling, and for a moment the boy who had demanded adventure in Buckland was gone, and replaced by someone who understood the price of roads. Aragorn's gaze went to the south. "Then we must go to the Shire," he said, and the words carried a king's command. They returned west, not as wandering travelers, but as a small force of purpose. Gandalf walked beside Frodo, whose limp never fully left him. Sam walked on Frodo's other side, eyes always scanning, as if expecting the world to reach for Frodo again. When they entered the Shire, the air smelled wrong. Smoke, stale ale, human sweat. The trees had been cut, hedges were broken. A new ugly mill stood by the water, belching black fumes that smeared the sky. Hobbits moved quietly, heads down, eyes wary. Laughter was rare. Even the birds seemed fewer. Sam stopped, staring at a line of felled trees, and made a sound like choking. "They cut them," he whispered. "They cut our trees." Frodo's face went white. He had imagined returning home as a reward. Instead, he returned to a place that looked like it had been held underwater and pulled out changed. In Hobbiton, ruffians lounged outside the Green Dragon, boots on tables, mugs in hand. They laughed loudly, as if trying to drown out the discomfort of being in a land that did not welcome them. When they saw Gandalf and Aragorn and the hobbits approaching, their laughter faltered. One man stood, hand going to his belt. "Who are you supposed to be?" he demanded. Aragorn stepped forward, eyes cold. "Leave," he said. The man snorted. "Or what? You will tell Sharky?" Gandalf's staff tapped the road. The sound was small. It silenced the men. "Sharky is not here to save you," Gandalf said. The ruffians shifted uneasily. They were used to bullying small folk, not facing a wizard whose eyes held storms. They tried anyway. They drew knives. They rushed. Aragorn moved like a blade. Gandalf's staff struck, not killing, but breaking arms and wills. Merry fought with a ferocity born of grief, near knocking a man down and holding him there with a foot on his chest, breathing hard. Sam stood over a fallen ruffian, sword trembling in his hands, and for a moment he looked at the man's terrified face and saw that he was simply a man, not an orc, not a wraith. Sam's hand shook harder. Frodo's voice cut through. "Enough," Frodo said, and his voice carried an authority that surprised even him. Sam froze. Frodo stepped forward, limping, eyes bright with pain and something like wisdom. "Go," he told the ruffians, "and if you come back, you will not be spared again." The men, seeing Gandalf and Aragorn, seeing the hobbits no longer meek, fled. The Shire rose, slowly, painfully, as if waking from a drugged sleep. Hobbits gathered. Tools became weapons. The battle of Bywater in this altered world came earlier, sharper, and it came with Gandalf present, with Aragorn's sword at the front, with Merry's grief fueling his arm. They drove out the ruffians. They tore down the ugly mill. They began to replant trees. Yet victory tasted strange. Pippin was not there to laugh about it. The party tree had been cut down. Bag End's garden was trampled. Old Hamfast Gamgee stood in his ruined yard, staring at Sam, eyes wet. He reached out and touched Sam's face with a trembling hand, as if confirming he was real. "You went and you came back," the gaffer whispered. Sam nodded, swallowing hard. "I did," he said, "but it cost." Frodo walked up the hill to Bag End and stood before the round door. It was still there, but the paint was chipped and the brass knob was tarnished. The windows were dirty. The place looked as if it had been waiting for him and had grown tired. He placed his hand on the door and felt, absurdly, that the house did not recognize him. Inside, the air smelled stale. dust lay on the table where Gandalf had once slammed his hand and made the ring jump. Frodo walked to the spot and stood there, breathing, remembering. He expected to feel the ring's weight and realized, and with a jolt, that he would never feel it again. Relief rose. Then disquiet seeped in. Without the ring, why did he still feel watched sometimes? Why did his dreams still smell of ash? Why did his shoulder ache when the weather turned? Why did his heart tighten when he heard a horse in the distance? Gandalf sat with him in the dim light of Bag End. The wizard's face looked older now, not because of years, but because of things survived. "It is done," Frodo whispered, as if saying it enough times might make it true in his bones. "It is done," Gandalf agreed. Frodo stared at the empty space on the table. "Was it better," Frodo asked, voice barely audible, "that we left sooner?" Gandalf was silent for a long time. Outside, wind moved through wounded trees, making a sound like a sigh. "I do not know," Gandalf said at last, and honesty in his voice was heavier than any certainty. "We saved some pains. We hastened others. We spared the world a long hunt. But we did not spare its sorrow." Frodo's eyes filled with tears. "And Pippin?" he whispered. Gandalf's gaze softened. "The world does not balance accounts in ways we find fair," he said. "But in the end, the shadow lost what it was built upon, and that is no small thing. In Gondor, Denethor never burned. He never saw the full despair that the ring's long war would have brought. Yet he felt the tremor of Sauron's fall like a distant earthquake, and it left him shaken, staring at his hands as if wondering what kind of world could change so suddenly. In Rohan, Theoden's mind cleared sooner, not because Wormtongue was revealed in a dramatic confrontation, but because Saruman's web snapped when his hopes of the ring died. Some poisons lose strength when their source is cut off. Yet Rohan still mourned riders lost in skirmishes that had erupted without warning, because evil flails when it realizes it has lost. In Lorien, Galadriel stood beneath her trees and felt the pressure ease. She did not rejoice loudly. She simply closed her eyes and breathed, and a long-held tension loosened. In Orthanc, Saruman screamed when he felt the ring's destruction. He raged against stone walls, voice shattering glass. His treachery had been premature, his grasping too quick, and now his prize was ash. His servants, hearing his fury, began to doubt him. A leader who promises power and delivers nothing becomes dangerous even to his own. Saruman did not fall from a tower in this road. He lingered, bitter, diminished, plotting in a world that no longer needed him, and that was perhaps a worse punishment. Frodo did not become a grand hero sung about in halls of kings. He became something quieter and stranger, a hobbit who had seen the world's foundation crack and had lived through it. His smiles returned sometimes, but they were thinner. He sat in his garden and watched Sam plant new saplings, hands gentle with soil, and he felt love like a warm cloth over a wound. Merry, too, changed. He laughed less. He carried Pippin's memory like a small stone in his pocket, always there, always felt when his hand brushed it. Sometimes, in the evening, Merry would stand on a hill and look toward Tookland, and his throat would tighten. He did not speak much about it. Grief in the Shire became a private weather. Gandalf stayed for a time, walking lanes, speaking with hobbits, helping rebuild what had been broken. He watched children play again, cautiously at first, then with growing ease. He listened to new songs being made, songs with an edge of sorrow woven into their sweetness. Then one morning, he stood at the edge of Hobbiton and looked back at the hill. Frodo stood in the doorway of Bag End, cloak around his shoulders, hair stirred by a light breeze. "You will leave again," Frodo said, not as a question. Gandalf nodded. "And my work here is not finished," he said, "but it is no longer yours to carry." Frodo's eyes held him. "Will the shadow return?" Frodo asked quietly, and it was one of the last questions a ring-bearer asks, even when the ring is gone. Gandalf's gaze went to the horizon, to the far unseen lands. "Not as it was," he said. "But darkness is not only a tower in Mordor, it is also a whisper in a heart. We must always be watchful." Frodo swallowed. "And if I had stayed in the Shire for 17 more years?" he whispered, as if haunted by the life he might have had. Gandalf's eyes softened with a deep, weary kindness. "Then you would have had 17 years of peace," he said. "And perhaps the war would have come anyway, and you would have lost them all at once. Or perhaps you would have been found, and the Shire would have burned before you ever took a step. We do not get to live both roads." Frodo nodded slowly, accepting a truth that offered no comfort, but did offer clarity. Gandalf turned to go. He walked down the lane, staff tapping softly, cloak trailing behind like a fading shadow of a storm. Frodo watched until he could no longer see him, until the road curved and swallowed him. Inside Bag End, the table where the ring had once lain remained scratched, stained faintly by old candle wax and older fear. Frodo touched the wood lightly, fingers tracing the grain. He felt relief again, real and warm. Then he felt the quiet disquiet beneath it, the understanding that some victories still leave hollows. Outside, wind moved through newly planted trees, and the leaves whispered like distant ash falling. And in the dim light of Bag End, the dust on the table turned slowly in a small circle, as if remembering the shape of a vanished ring.